Okay, let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmeen. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just from last week, our respected Ustad Hazrat Mufti Hussain Saab, Damat Barakatuh, he messaged me and he mentioned that he said he just wanted to inform us that the kitab names are from Imam Muhammad rahimahullah. When we were discussing Jami Saghir, so he said this is a important point. That only the kitab names are from Imam Muhammad rahimahullah. The chapters therein are from those later, most probably the Muratib Abu Tahir al-Dabbas rahimahullah. That really helps in even this discussion then on within a particular kitab, different sections and how the ideas flow across. All the more so going back to Imam Muhammad rahimahullah. So that's just something which was very insightful and helpful just to make that whole discussion clear, inshallah. But nevertheless, let's begin. We were on Salam from last week. We didn't start the actual kitab, if I recall correctly, but we'll begin, inshallah. Sheikh Yunus, are you with us? Not sure he is. It doesn't matter. We'll begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman. So, السلام جائز في المكيلات والموزونات والمذروعات والمعدودات التي لا تتفاوت كالجوز والبيض وصغير البيض وكبيره سواء. The asal we discussed last week, remember the entirety of salam is khilaf al-qiyas. So when something is khilaf al-qiyas as a bab is istihsan, why is it istihsan? The qiyas of is bay'ul ma'dum is not permissible. Salam is bay'ul ma'dum because the salam seller, right? The salam seller, the Muslim ilay, he is selling something he does not own. Remember the entire scene of salam was a person would be selling something they don't own yet. It's not in their milkiya, neither is in their possession, but they need cash right now. So a buyer comes and he pays the full amount up front and he'll get a delivery at a later date. That is what salam looks like and when it's visualized. Why was this done? Because there was a better deal for those engaging in salam. Because what's the wisdom? Why would a person pay for something right now if they can't receive it right now? Then there has to be a trade-off. Whenever there's a transaction is about trade-offs. Up here, the trade-off is that although you're not getting the item delivered right now, but you're getting it at a cheaper price. That's how you, as a buyer, benefit. So that's why people were incentivized to enter into a salam transaction. Otherwise, there is no incentive. That's another kind of like a commercial aspect you have to think about. Every transaction has incentives, and that's one of the ways when analyzing a transaction, you have to think, what's the incentive of this party? What's the incentive of this party? And then based on the incentives, structures are built. So when in product development, for instance, if a scholar is working now in the Islamic finance space, one of the things in product development is understanding the incentives of people and what is bringing them to the table. Is it a commercial incentive? Is it an economic incentive? Is it another form of incentive? And then a product is developed, taking everybody's incentives into consideration and the kind of reasons for coming to the table and to the transaction. So in those times, the buyer was incentivized with a cheaper price compared to the market rate for the same item. But Salam was against the qiyas because Bay requires the seller to have milkiya and he has to be mawjood, the item. He has to have milkiya, has to be mawjood. So when Salam was permitted, what was Salam permitted in? Salam was permitted in the idea of Bay'ul Ma'dum. Uh, that was approved by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he came to Medina Munawwara. And so that part of Salam, and this is important, you will see this in a bab. When something is established by istihsan, it doesn't mean the entire thing now is working on istihsan. We only extend the istihsan to the level and depth is extended to in the nas. Beyond that, we'll revert back to the qiyas. So we'll see examples where in salam, the other masail are operating on the qiyas of bay'. They'll revert back to the major principles that we know, or the overarching principle that we are accustomed to and aware of. But as far as selling bay'ul ma'dum, that's the khilaf al-qiyas, that's the istihsan case. So that will continue. But then the fuqaha will do ilhaq, and they'll add other things to this istihsan case because of a very strong mushabaha or very strong connection between the istihsan case and the case that they are discussing and analyzing. And we'll see that shortly as well. Because salam was established against the norm, against the logic of bay, in that it's bay'ul ma'dum. Now, to understand this, uh, we have to understand then the illah of bay, or the illah that's underpinning salam. We mentioned that the underlying asal in salam is everything that can be made ضبط of. كل ما أمكن ضبط صفته ومعرفة مقداره جاز السلام فيه. This is the asal. And this asal rests upon the overarching asal, the main asal, which is raful munaza'a. Remember, maybe in the first couple of slides, I must have shared an ibara. I think it was in Aini. I can't remember who said it where, but it's in the slide somewhere. That the entirety of mu'amalat and buyu can be summed up potentially in two principles: riba and munaza'a, or you could say gharar. These are the two key, everything or majority of the prohibitions are kind of going back to these two. That's why these are very like aghlabi, you could say, overarching principles where you could potentially find a connection to riba or to gharar. Remember, gharar incorporates munaza, jahala, qimar, because tamlik ala khatar. All these ideas fit into gharar as well. So these two are very broad. And so raf'ul munaza, this entire bab is functioning on the concept of raf'ul munaza'a. And that's why you have this principle in salam where you have to do dabt of the sifa and you have to know the miqdar. If you don't do that, then there's munaza'a being triggered. And that's a qaida kulliya. We can't have munaza'a in bay. So that's why once you've understood this, that the entire bab is just about doing dafa of munaza'a. That's what it's about. And so all the rules are preventing munaza'a. That's why when it comes to then what can be sold in salam, because you're dealing with something not existing. When you're dealing with something that doesn't exist, the risk of munaza'a increases more. Why does the risk of munaza'a increase more? It's because you can't define what you're selling. It's not something visible, tangible, specified. There's nothing there. The only thing that you're doing is describing. So your description can be at odds with the haqiqah, which is the item when it's delivered. And it's that discrepancy between the two which causes niza'. It's the discrepancy between what's delivered and what was described to you at the time of the aqd. That discrepancy and mismatch is what creates and causes niza'. That's why the sharia and the fiqh tries to bridge the gap between these two things, in that you can only sell those things which typically will be as close as possible to the description provided. And what are those things? Those things are mithliyat, because mithliyat are typically uniform, in that if you're selling one thing which is makili and you present any of its units or afrad, then they're very likely to be similar. And when they're similar, then the discrepancy and mismatch between what was agreed to in the contract and what's been delivered will be bridged. There'll be very little, it'll be negligible almost. And that's why mithliyat is uh, uh, in the nas, kail and wazn, but then there's other things the fiqh has mentioned as well. So the nas mentions these two things. We've added some other things as well, right? These two. Now, why have our fuqaha mentioned these things? Then there's a discussion amongst our fuqaha that what allows us to add um, the ma'adudat التي لا تتفاوت والمذروعات So some fuqaha have said, look, it's dalalatan, like a dalalatul nas, that it was known if it's makiliya just by the text alone, we understand this particular point. Others say no, this is like a takhsis. Makiliya and mawzuni were made makhsus, and it was takhsis from the nas of Bay al-Ma'dum, and therefore this nas now becomes weaker, and therefore other things can also become taken out from there, and the takhsis can take place. So that's another way the fuqaha have looked at it. So the idea is up here, these things are in the ma'na of makilat and mawzunat in the fact that they don't differ in the units, or there's negligible difference between the units. Okay, so mithliyat, what are mithliyat? We have makilat, mawzunat, madru'at. Yeah, just a typo there. Madru'at with a D. There's no tafat. So like something that you're weighing, sorry, you are measuring like a cloth or something, where there's no difference. Because typically there's two types of madru'at. There's madru'at where there's difference in the cloth itself. In those times when it was, sewn by the hand, or weaved by the hand, there could be differences in every single produced item. But once the production becomes standardized, then there's very little difference. So your madru'at, your adadiyat mutasawiya, those things are exactly the same, but they're adadi. Likewise, adadiyat mutaqariba, very similar. There's very little discrepancy, difference between each unit. They're all deemed to be mithliyat because in the urf again, qiyas up here would be, the qiyas asal is, it's not mithli. That's the qiyas. Qiyas is, it's not mithli because really there is a difference. Istihsan has made adadiyat mutaqariba mithli. Really, adadiyat mutaqariba should have been qimi because there is a difference between each unit. Haqiqatan, there's a difference. But because of urf, we've done ihdar of the tafawut. We've overlooked the tafawut and difference, and that's why the istihsan approach up here is that we put it to mithliyat. Otherwise, really, qiyasan, they should have been acceptable. So that's that. And then qimiyat is your adadiyat mutafawita, things that are um, again counted but completely different, and the madruat with underlying tafawut. Today's day and age, most of the things that we buy, like all these goods, um, all the electronic appliances, technological products, items, goods. These are all now adadiyat mutasawiya for the most part, or might be mutaqariba, mutasawiya, like the same. So all the phones of like a particular brand, model, data, that's all of that would be the same because they're standardized, they're manufactured in a factory. So the production is entirely the same. So in today's day and age, a lot of things are standardized, and there's the qimiyat then are reduced significantly in today's day and age. But remember, comparing today's day and age to the previous times, we have so many more assets compared to earlier times. And so we have to understand that in earlier times, a person would have, like, there was no fridge, freezer, there was not a lot of space for most people to have, so many things. Um, your goods were limited. You only had assets in the real economy, meaning you had your food stuff, you had animals, you had crops, you had slaves, you had furniture, tools, appliances, kitchenware, cutlery, what else? Bedding, clothes, and then your gold and silver. Yeah, and yeah, those were your assets. So they were all your hawaij, like the typical hawaij that people need. There was very little excess or surplus things, or amwal, which are not really hawaij per se, not used, but just luxuries, or you could say um, complementary assets and goods. Today's day and age is completely different because of like industrialization, specialization. We now have multiple assets, like hundreds of different things that a person can own. So the world has changed tremendously in that regard. And that's important even like in other discussions of zakah and these things where the different context of what comes under age, what doesn't come under age, understanding the lifestyle differences, what's today you're expected. I mean, it's more for the most part, every single person would have a fridge, a freezer, a cooker, a boiler, a microwave, a kettle. You can't have a kitchen without these things. In the parts of the world where we live, for instance, it'd be very odd. Like it's very unlikely somebody has that would be like nadir, almost negligible, and not practical or possible. And so this now becomes part and parcel of it's not only then the food, but it's the things that even prepare the food and those things. So now you're looking at secondary, tertiary assets which are supporting your primary assets. So if your primary asset is food, in the earlier times you'd only have a primary asset. You'd have the animal, you'd have the food. So exactly where the consumption is taking place or the manfa'a is being derived from. Today we have assets which are supporting the very asset which is at the primary level. Then you have something else that's supporting that level. So it's like the levels of assets have um, drastically increased, and that's really changed the kind of like dynamics of what people own, why they need to own, and how that becomes part of their kind of necessity, almost. So that's a different thing just to think about, right? So most of these goods fall under adadiyat now and mutaqariba mutasawiya because they're all mass produced in factories. Now, so that's in Salam has to work in these things which are mithliyat or mithliyat and those things which have no difference. If it's like ma'dudat التي لا تتفاوت, which is also deemed to be mithli, كالجوز والبيض. Now, why is that the case? Because remember, we just discussed right now that the what you deliver to your end customer should be resembling what was agreed to at the outset. If there is a difference, a discrepancy, then very likely there could be nizar. And that's what the Sharia is trying to prevent altogether. So we'll allow it as long as there's no nizar. How do we know that? Because nizar, not nizar, that's again a thing in the future. So the Sharia will, that's like Amar Batini almost. So that's why the hukam is never based on nizar, but there are some ahkam, like, bay'ul fasid. When it's a bay'ul fasid, when something is in the sifat, you can rectify it before the mufsid manifests. So that's allowed. Although it's fasid, but it can be overturned, which we discussed in bay'ul fasid. But for the most part, the hukam initially is what the fiqh will revolve around and is based upon. So we'll make sure this is the fiqh. We're trying to prevent the niza, which is in the future. We have to do it like this. If it's done according to this, you're good. If it's not done according to this, and then the risk of niza is high, the aqd will not be valid, even if niza doesn't take place then. But the risk of niza is high. Then the fuqaha mention one thing. They mention this والمعدودات التي لا تتفاوت كالجوز والبيض. These two items, these are ma'dudat. Why have they been mentioned separately? And then they mentioned وصغير البيض وكبيره سواء. There is, as I mentioned, there is a real difference between these two things. A صغير بيض and a كبير بيض. Any person who's an aqil, he's looking at these items, there is a real difference. So qiyasan, it should have been not permissible. That's the qiyas up here. But there's been an istihsan, another istihsan now based on urf. So you see the levels of abstraction and istihsan that's happening in masail, where we're continuously moving away from the qiyas based on different factors, either it's nas, urf, or dawra, or this or that, taysir. Up here, it's the urf is playing a role in moving these items now towards the istihsan. Next, don't know if okay, maybe I'll carry on. وكذلك sorry. Yeah, وكذلك في الفلوس عددا. Likewise in fulus, it's saying you can do salam in fulus. What does this mean? Yeah, salam can be done in fulus عددا because this is a product. At the end of this bab, when we finish this bab of salam, we look at some Islamic finance stuff and how salam is used today in the world. There is a product that's developed in Pakistan, which is a currency salam. Currency salam, where they do salam in currency, um, which is could be debated, and they use the idea of fulus. But the problem with that is, and the problem up here is, when the fuqaha talk about doing salam in fulus, what do they mean? It's referring to the scenario when thamaniya has been deactivated completely. So now fulus become, they were adadi, they were in the society, they were being used as adadi. Although the aslan they were mawzoon, but then they were used as adad, the fulus. When you deactivate the thamaniya aspect, then it can become muta'ayyan, it's no longer dain. Because thaman, money, is always dain, it's always debt. It can never be muta'ayyan, like we discussed before. That's why whenever you are buying something, you don't have to give a specific coin. You can give anything which equals to the value. You can pay using a card, a debit card, you can use cash, you can use notes, whatever medium of payment you want to make, because it's never muta'ayyan. But the question is, can you, once it's not once you do isqat of thamaniya and you deactivate it, and remember, according to Shaykhain, the asal is people have absolute wilaya over their wealth and assets. Their asal was individuals have full milkiya. You can only have full milkiya when you have the ability to trade the way you want without restrictions and without anybody telling you what your wealth is and what your wealth is not. So from once kamil milkiya, you have to have wilaya. Wilaya necessitates that you can deactivate yourself what is money and what is not money. It's left to you. So, I mean, fulus is not naturally money anyway. This is money which is based on urf and istilah and usage of people. It's not something which is thaman khilqatan, like gold and silver. That can never be deactivated because the Shari' has defined, as far as we're concerned, thamaniya from day one. The Shari' has defined gold and silver as thaman khilqatan. Until today, gold possesses all the optimal characteristics for money. It has it all in it. Right? Yeah, divisibility and these things might be challenging today, but there's solutions to that as well. So gold and silver can't be deactivated by any party because that's khilqatan, has thamaniya or moneyness built within it. Fulus wasn't the case. That was um, introduced by people and deemed to be money based on the urf and understanding of people. So Shaykhain, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Yusuf rahimahumullah, were of the view that people can deactivate this when they want. And they can do tasarruf as they wish, and it's part of their wilaya and milkiya that they have this authority to do this. If you can't do that, then your ability to transact in your own wealth is restricted. So it is like a, conceptually or more philosophically, there's a recognition of private property rights, that every individual, private citizen, has full property rights, that nobody can intervene in somebody's private assets, their own transactions. And typically, that is the norm in Sharia. We have a framework within which we work. There is governance at the market level, but beyond that, it's left to the people to decide how they want to transact and how they want to operate. And this asal feeds into that whole idea. So Shaykhin, based on Shaykhin's view, when people can deactivate fulus, then fulus is no longer thaman, it can become muta'ayyan, and then it's not about what money you have, it's purely then about the adad or whatever you're selling. It can become described. Then the felt itself is an asset fi nafsihi. Because if it was money, then we don't do any i'tibar, we don't consider what the asset is at all. It's just purely the number. We're only concerned with the value. We're not concerned with the coin itself. because that is then, because of it being thamaniya, is completely overlooked. We're just concerned with its purchasing power. But when you deactivate thamaniya, we're no longer concerned with the purchasing power of fulus. Now we are concerned with the actual coin, the metal itself. And that can be described, that can be muta'ayyan, that can be, the sifa can be madbut. You can do a dabt of the sifa then. And that is what salam requires. Salam requires you do a dabt of the sifa. In money, sifa is ma'dum. There is no sifat in money. And salam requires dabt of sifa. So to make this mas'ala work, you have to do cancel this. You have to cancel the thamaniya to activate the sifat again, and then salam becomes possible. And according to Imam Muhammad rahimahullah, remember, individuals can't do this. Individuals do can't cancel or deactivate the thamaniya of fulus. His asal is different, right? The way he looks at istilahul kul, overpowering individual istilah, like the wilaya amma. There's like a wilaya amma here almost, or and the urf am is stronger than your individual tasarruf. So that was this mas'ala. That's why it becomes permissible to do salam in this when it has sifat again, because you can do dabtu sifa. Next is ولا يجوز السلم في الحيوان ولا في أطرافه. It's not permissible to do salam in animals or no, it's kind of like cuts and body parts. We go back to the asal. Can you specify and ensure or describe objectively as much as possible what's going to be delivered? The answer is no. There'll be discrepancy in the actual delivered unit always, because this type of asset can never be in uniform or identical. Why is that the case? Because animals have ma'ani batiniya. They have intrinsic qualities. Like one animal might be strong, one might be lazy, the other might be weak, the other might be this, sick, ill. These are things beyond our control. They can't be objectively controlled. When you can't be objectively controlled, you can never have a high level of assurance and ghalabatul dhann that you'll deliver what was agreed to. So the risk of niza is always high. And whenever the risk of niza, munaza'a, discord, dispute is high, you can't have salam. Because that at the end of the day then is breaching the meta and overarching principle in mu'amalat of munaza'a. So salam operates in a realm which is after the kind of qiyas of bay'ul ma'dum. We've gone past that. So we've gone a level deeper because of istihsan. So like those are the qiyas. This is how you have to think about it. It's like a stack. Those who are like, into tech, right? You got like a stack being built up here. You have the top layer, which is your qiyasat or your aqisa. Bay'ul ma'dum functions there. This salam, that ma umkin dhabtu sifatihi wa ma'rifatu miqdarihi, surpasses that and goes to the next stack, the next layer. It's gone deeper. It's allowed, it's gone there. We've allowed certain things which the qiyas wouldn't have permitted. Yet it does not allow you to trespass the lowest stack and the strongest stack, which is munaza'a. That doesn't, you can't trespass that at all. So that's where this is operating. So whenever there's munaza'a, it will not be permitted. So like that's the reason why these cases are not permissible. Likewise, atraf, the cuts. There is the fuqaha have mentioned about this, that if it's possible to standardize, then it'll be permissible, but not in hayawan, right? In whenever it's possible to do something, like the debate is when something becomes possible to standardize to a large degree, where the urf does not deem it to be different, materially different, and the difference is insignificant, then the asl of salam would be permissible. So something, it could be possible in those times, it was not possible to have standardization in certain things, but today it is possible to a very large degree, and where we will not be breaching the principle of munaza'a, based on the asal, it can become permissible. But then that depends on industry standards and what you're looking at. Next is وَلَا فِي الْجُلُودِ عَدَدًا. Neither is salam permissible. Yeah, this is an example of where the fuqaha have later mentioned that it's permissible to do this, even though the earlier book said it's not permissible. So وَلَا فِي الْجُلُودِ عَدَدًا, that neither is it permissible to do salam in hide and skins, because think about it, in those times, these skins, hides, their cut sizes were all different. They were never uniform or standardized. I go to somebody, order, I've paid him up front as salam, and I've ordered wool, like a sheepskin or cow skin or camel skin or whatever skin there is, right? And what do I get? I don't know what I'll get. It's just whatever he can get. The size, I might have ordered a specific size. It's not guaranteed he'll be able to deliver that. What he gets could be very different. The color he gets is very different. And two, three of them will all be different. So if he has three different things, each one can be different. That discrepancy is the problem because there's no supply chain that gives a standardized unit, which then results in the possibility of discord or increases the possibility and potential of discord, dispute, and nizar. That's why that was a problem. However, um, yeah, just one more point up here. The adad issue, this adadan thing is not a qaid like ihtirazi. This was just because that's how it was done then. People would, these things were always traded as units. They were never weighed or measured or these types of like ways of identifying the asset. The fuqaha later on mention when it's possible to work out and identify and kind of specify the skin, and then you can make amal upon the asal of salam, which is the dabt of the sifa, then it becomes permissible. So although it says wala fil juludi adadan, it's also ma'lul bil illa. Like all all of this is ma'lul bil illa. If the illa is no longer found, like the niza, then it become permissible. When will the illa not be found? It's when you can do dabt of the sifa. When you can do dabt of sifa, the hukm will change that it's permissible and jaz salamu fi. Likewise, wala fil hatami hazman. Neither is it permissible to do salam in a bundle of wood. What does this mean? It just means without any additional information, you've just gone to a seller and said, deliver to me 1 month later a stack of wood. What size, strength, length, depth, width, all of that is problematic. And remember, it wasn't standardized as we have today. So in those times, you're just going, somebody's trying to get a stack together of different pieces of wood and is selling that. The fuqaha mention, as is mentioned in text, that when you can specify, then when you do specify and you put extra specifications which allow some form of uniformity, and the deliverable can be defined and known to a good extent, then it becomes permissible. As long as you can do dabt the sifa, it can become permissible. When you can't do dabt the sifa, it will not be permissible. That's again, we just back to the asal again. That's why the fuqaha have also mentioned that separately. ولا في رطبة جرزا. There's different translations of this, right? So one translation is like a pack of dates. Like a rotba is like a crop. Some have translated it as dates, but a crop which is then like a pack jurazan. So these are different sizes. It comes in different units of such dates. There's no uniformity in size. That's why again it can lead to niza. If you could do dabt of the sifa, it becomes permissible. So these are just examples that they're giving where uniformity was not possible because every unit was delivered differently, and therefore if you order something you'll never get what you expected and what you had ordered. When expectations are not met, that's what triggers munaza'ah. Remember that. So because the expectation was not met here in this instance, it triggers munaza'ah and it's no longer possible or permissible. When expectations can be met, then that means you've done dabt of the sifa, and it'll become permissible. Another one, ولا يجوز السلم حتى يكون المسلم فيه موجودا من حين العقد إلى حين المحل. It's not permissible to do salam until the salam item, the sale item, is mawjood from the moment of the aqd, from executing the contract إلى حين المحل, until you've delivered the item. So throughout that period, it has to be available. The salam item has to be available. Now this seems to be khilaf al-qiyas. This shirt, how does this shirt even, like, where does this shirt come from? Typically, this is not a qiyas of bay. So now you have to think that where does this asal derive from? The answer is that it's because of a riwayah, a hadith that we have, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, لا تسلفوا في النخل حتى يبدو صلاحه. So our fuqaha understood this to mean that for the sihha of salam, for salam to be valid, the Muslim fee has to be mawjood from the moment of the aqd. That's one of the istinbat that the fuqaha have done, that it must be existing. And our asal is that the salam fil munqati la yajuz indana. That's our asal. We've derived that now because it's not a qiyasi meaning. This is not a qiyasi meaning, because that kind of thing, although in bay that doesn't happen. In bay you can't do bay al ma'dum anyway. So this really doesn't apply. But the question mark arises that where does this asal come from? How do we fit it in the understanding of bay? Because we only move to the istihsan, which bay al ma'dum, being permissible in salam, and we restrict it there. But this is another condition that's different to the bay al ma'dum idea. This is telling you the Muslim fee has to be existing somewhere. It has to be existing, in existence. It's not with you, but it has to be existing somewhere. And that we've understood from the Nas. Again, this is another lever and mechanism and tool to mitigate the gharar. So the entirety of the Nas, the entirety of Nas and the fiqh is mitigating the risk of nizar. Because yes, one way we've mitigated is at the time of the contract. We've put all these conditions in to ensure that the contract operates in those things which can be delivered in the way agreed to. But then there's another consideration, which is, what about delivery? There's another condition. Like one point was matching what was agreed to with what is delivered. We've addressed that part. The second condition is now addressing, well, you might have found an item which can match what was agreed to initially. However, what if the item is no longer available in the market? That's also going to cause nizar. So this is another sabab and means in the chapter of salam which brings nizar. Hence, for this idea to be grounded and to be addressed, you need a nas. This bab again is based on istihsan to some extent. So this nas comes in and prevents this gharar as well. So the gharar is now reduced again, in that we'll only allow salam in those things which has wujud. Why is that necessary? Why is that important? Because the fuqaha now they attach this istihsan to the qiyas. How do they look how they attach the istihsan to the qiyas? There's always that connection. There's always a tether or a link between the istihsan and qiyas. And you'll see that over and over again. The fuqaha will always try to qiyasify or even istihsans. So they mention, look, this is an example of qiyasifying, if that's even a word. Yeah, let's just use that word for now. They're trying to model this idea of istihsan around the qiyas. Why is it necessary to have wujud now? Why would that be an istihsan? It's an istihsan, but it's connected to the qiyas of bay, because qudra ala taslim is from the principles of bay. It's from the qiyas of bay, the usul of bay. To have qudra ala taslim, to be able to deliver an item. That's an asl in bay. But you can only do taslim and have qudra on taslim when it's possible to do iktisab of something. It's possible for you to go and acquire. And you can only acquire something if it has wujud and has no inqita. That's why our fuqaha have put this condition in, and look how they've attached the whole thing together. with they've given the istihsan a qiyasi meaning. Like they've elaborated the idea, and they'll always try to show how the istihsan is consistent with our fiqh and our qiyas understanding. Always. You'll all even the masala of like masal al-khuffain. If you read Hidayah, you begin to see how even the masail of masal al-khuffain, how they are reasoning and rationalizing the bab. The fuqaha giving ideas over and over again, how it fits in our qiyas. So that's important. Like our fiqh does this, the endeavor is always in every single bab. So we're doing the same thing here. Now the question arises, what does inqita actually mean? Right? What does inqita actually mean? Inqita means up here that it's not available in the market you're in. That was what the fuqaha had mentioned in was inqita. Now, obviously, today's inqita can be very well different because we have global supply chains, we have um, different ways. But to understand inqita, this would go back down to the urf again. The what does the market understand uh, as far as wujud is concerned? To what extent? How readily available is something? How many barriers are there? Are there any barriers between you and getting that particular product or not? How quickly can you supply that product? These are questions. If there's barriers and challenges, like barriers from external parties, not the seller, not the seller. That's not a barrier because you'll always have to source the item from somewhere. But if there's barriers, other barriers, let's say tariffs, um, excise duties, customs, these types of things. There is some regulatory reasons why you can't buy certain things. So that would then become like the border. That would, as far as that is concerned, it wouldn't be valid for this mas'ala. It'd be everything which is within the border for you to be able to get access to. And then you have to think about other things. How quickly can you, what's today in today's day and age deemed to be available? Because we have supply chains every day, we have lorries, trucks on the move continuously. Most of the goods that we have in a market today, like this is the reality, in your city center, your shopping mall that you go to, majority of the goods are not from that mall. In fact, I would say it's possible that 95%, 99% of goods being sold in those stores have come from either other parts of the country or from overseas. So there is the concept of market has been redefined. It's not a mahal, physical mahal today. Rather, a market is supply chains. That's your market. It's not, you can't say physically this is the market today. Today's market is something completely different as far as Tujjar are concerned. For you, your market is the where you're shopping. There's digital markets. Your Amazon is a digital market, and whichever other website you trade on and buy things from. But then there's a market up there where, as a seller, this remember from a seller's perspective. We're talking about seller from a seller's perspective, not a buyer's perspective, because the seller is the one who has to make the delivery to the buyer, the customer. As far as the seller is concerned, that's not his market at all. Like nobody buys anything from there. Yes, but on the other side of the thing, you could say, yeah, well, regardless of that, if you're selling something on sell basis, the item still should be available in the shopping mall, for instance, right? Like that. So you just say it's a huge shopping mall, and you've sold something on sell basis. As long as you can get it from a mall, somebody in the mall sells the same item, that's fine. That can work as well as a possibility. But to restrict it to the shopping mall, I think would have to understand what the market actually means and um, the aspect of qudra. Like, is the shopping, are you restricted? Why was the market? Why was it restricted to the market? On what basis? And then you expand the idea to today's markets. Is it to do with accessibility? Is it to do with speed, expedience? Is it to do with possibility of delivery? These are some of the things that we'd have to think about and then formulate an idea to what extent. Like, can you extend the idea to two shopping malls, five shopping malls, your entire city? And remember, in earlier times, typically there was only one, two, three markets. It wasn't like you just probably have a major market and that's where everything was. To the extent the fuqaha mentioned is that what's in the homes of people is not considered because that's the private space of people. So that's private assets are not considered in this. It's those things which are being sold and readily available. Hence, that becomes the market. So these are some considerations for what a market means. Somebody would just whoever would write a fatwa on this, they'd have to like clearly define this and do some kind of like market research and try to understand what the fuqaha have said, find all the ma'ani, and put together um, a proposal of that, right? Then he mentions ويجوز السلم في السمك المالح وزنا معلوما وضربا معلوما. Now again, this is a tafri now from the asl that we just discussed. This is a tafri of the asl, which is typically certain things might not be deemed to have wujud. Yes, your stomach is one thing because fresh fish are not always available. Some fish are not always available all the time. Like a fresh fish, if you're selling fresh fish, it's only possible for one day, whatever, until because of the heat, you are not able to preserve certain assets. But a fish which is preserved using salt, then that would be readily available for a long period of time. So if you were to order such meat or food, then it'll be possible because the asal is found. Which asal are we talking about now? The asal of wujud plus wazn ma'luman wa darban ma'luman. That's mentioned to fulfill the other asal of salam, which is dabt of sifa and ma'rifatu miqdar. So it becomes permissible because we can now um, satisfy all salam criteria. ولا خير في السلم في السمك الطري إلا في حينه وزن معلوما وضربا معلوما. Now a question mark arises up here. What do the fuqaha mean by ولا خير? What does this mean? Like, why is ولا خير being mentioned? Anybody have an idea? Why ولا خير? That we've not read anywhere right now so far whilst reading Bidayat al-Mujtahid from the beginning. We've not seen the word ولا خير being used.
I mean, I know this is not what you want to answer, but it's like there's no good at all in Sana in
But
this
But why have the fuqaha specifically used this phraseology of wala khaira? Like, it's not.
because Sana there's no benefit in Sana in this
Hmm?
because Sana cannot apply here. There's
So
no
they could have
benefit
just said
here of
wala
Sana
yajuzu fi salam. But why didn't they say wala yajuzu?
because I think he's trying to say, dude, you can't even make an argument here at all, possibly.
Okay.
Like it says there, usually you probably can make an argument for it, but no. In this case, like la khayra, like because this is la negligence. So
Yeah.
he's saying that you can't even make an argument for this.
Okay. Fine. Some have said it's for mubalagha, which I've mentioned. Like this wala khaira, it is in al-asl, and it seems to stem from a hadith which our fuqaha have narrated. It's mentioned wala khaira. And so they're doing ittiba' of the nas here. Um, that's what it is. So it's used in several places in Al-Asr as well. So if you just do a quick search, you'll see wala khayra being used by Imam Muhammad. Um, and it does have the ma'na of mubalagha as the shurah have mentioned. So yeah, it's used and that's why it's just wala khayra and it's been wala khayra then ever since, right? From the nas and they've described it in this particular way. So wala khayra fi salam, like it's not permissible to do salam in fresh fish illa fi hinihi, except in its season when it's available. It has availability because now there's plenitude of it. It's possible to. There's the criterion of wujud has been met. Waznan ma'luman wa darban ma'luman meets the other criterion, which is that the dabt of the sifa should be there and the ma'rifat al-miqdar. These criteria have been met, and that's why it becomes permissible. So you see, Salam is just operating continuously in this space where we're just simply trying to satisfy the criteria to avoid niza and have wujud. That's it. As long as there's wujud to that thing, generally speaking, and we've done dabt of the sifa, it becomes permissible. Then everything, like we've done some kind of like ilhaq, we've allowed adadiyat, we've allowed things like this samak, which typically isn't available, but when it is available, we make it permissible. Because this, like the question arises, how can that be permissible? It's not available all year round. But the fuqaha go to that level and extend to say, look, even then just in its, if we can satisfy the illah or the istihsan idea of this wujud, will let it, go, and will be permitted. So to the as long as the principles can be found, we will permit. When it's not found, we will not permit. It's as simple as that. So even to the extent something not available all year round, but it's available in a particular window or period, it'll become permissible in that window and period because the illah can be found. We're literally revolving around the illah here and the principles that we know. That's what we follow. Those are sacred. They have meaning. That is what the shara is based upon. These are like Dr. Salah and others mentioned. These are like the like our maqasid. The maqasid of Sharia, these ilal and ta'alilat that we have. They all align to the deeper maqasid, like raf'ul munaza'a and no riba and these types of things, which then go into deeper maqasid. So these ta'alilat is what we are understanding the shara to be. We just follow that. When it's found, we obey. When it's not found, we also obey and we stay away from the transaction. Then ولا خير في السلم في اللحم عند أبي حنيفة رحمه الله تعالى وقال إذا وصف من اللحم موضعا معلوما بصفة معلومة جاز. So in lahm, can you do salam? Why would that not be permissible? What would the reason be? The reason would be that there could be discrepancy again. When there's discrepancy in the cuts, there'll be discrepancy in the valuation. And that's the greatest form of of debate and of niza. When the maliya of something is different, you expected the price or this item to be valued at a particular thing, and he's delivered a substandard asset to you, which is not of that value. That's when you'll have a problem. You will typically not have a problem when something is of a superior quality. The buyer will typically not have a problem. But he'll have a problem whenever something of a lower quality, which doesn't meet his criteria, specifications, valuation that he had in his mind, is delivered. So laham, this kind of meat thing, because there can be differences in size, weight across different seasons, the valuation could differ significantly, and therefore it can have niza. When there's high risk of niza, we will not allow salam in that because we can't meet the principles of salam in this particular asset. Sahibin, on the other hand, have said no. If the specifications of meat can be objectively identified, then the risk is minimized and it becomes permissible. Because now we are working according to uh, the asal. We are minimizing the potential niza because in this item, we have now allowed there to be, or we've permitted, or we've met the conditions of salam. So the Imam Abu Hanifa's view is the qiyas. It is the qiyas as far as lahm is concerned. Sahibin's view is the istihsan. That's the difference up here. Sahibin's view is the istihsan because aslan lahm has differences because of industry practice, uh, maybe later on, or the way they've understood it, that it's possible for dabt, you can do dabt in this particular thing, and hence the different view. So that same thing applies because aslan laham could be very, as we discussed earlier, the laham cuts, these things were very different and can be different. But as long as you can minimize the risk, you just need an objective way. That's the difference up here. Anything which is subjective based on the individual valuations, individual views, that is what can cause more niza. So we're trying to move away from subjectivity to objectivity. That's why the thing of sifa ma'luma and ma'rifatu miqdar, you're using kail and wazan and awsaf to bring an objective standard to the item being delivered. Because when things are objective, you have a reference to capture the essence of the item and to benchmark against or to refer to. So you have like a checklist, and that becomes your objective test whether this particular asset that's been delivered to you or not meets the criteria you had agreed to, it meets the terms and conditions. Whereas when there's no objective way, rather everything you might have defined certain things, but it's not possible to, like an animal, it's not possible to objectively capture that animal because what you deliver can be very different to what's agreed to. It's the units are very different. That's when there's an issue. So up here, as long as you can, figure out exactly this place, this piece of this quality of this meat, and it's possible to get something like that in the market. It's possible to have a few of those in the market where it becomes somewhat standardized. Then the risk of niza decreases, and then it becomes possible to. So according to Sahibain, they say no, it's possible to do that because you can mention these things. Although laham it can be difficult to acquire, but if you go to an extent where you make it somewhat possible objectively, it becomes permissible. ولا يجوز السلم إلا مؤجلة. This is the next mas'ala. This is the next asal. The next asal, that salam is not permissible except when it's mu'ajjal. Now, I think according to Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, for them, ajal is not a shart. So you can have salam, which is hal. I always was surprised, like, what does salam halan mean? Like, what's the point of salam hal? So if I recall correctly, they make a distinction between something which is present and something which is ghaib. If something is present, you don't do salam there. But something is ghaib, it's not with you, but it's ghaib, you can do salam in that thing. That's where you would that would become a salam immediately. That's the idea of where salam
Alaikum.
halan, right? If I understand correctly. Shaykh,
Argument. So our argument is basically is bin Baba Ola. Why do you have to make a restriction of time? So when the Hanifis got 3 days and many periods of time, it's like, why? Bin Baba Ola, what? Basically, so I'm just saying.
what's the reason? So how do they differentiate between a normal sale, which is hal? Is that the distinction between
No,
what
no,
is present?
it's simple that. It said, why do you want to restrict the amount of time, the minimum amount of time you have to have?
Hmm.
Why do that all? Where did you get this from? It's like min baba ola, because
Yeah.
basically have no time at all. And so that's basically essentially the argument is why? Why do you have to put time restriction at all? Where's it come from? You're saying, oh, Salah, we added these things in here. Well, why? Where does the time restriction come from? Where's the nas for it? Where's the proof for it?
Yeah.
So min baba
So
ola, why have it all?
yeah. So the Hanafis, we just go back to the Nas and say, look, ila ajalin ma'lum. The Nas very clearly says,
No, ajli ma'lum wa thana.
yeah. So that's what your response would be, right? So then
Yeah,
the
ajli ma'lum has no, it's not no miqdar to it, so you can give anything.
yeah. So the Hanafis, right? The way we understand it is, it has to be mu'ajjal. One, because of the hadith is there, obviously, right? That is our the entire starting point of the Salam discussion is from the Nas. But
Hmm.
secondly, the next point in this more again the qiyasi discussion up here then becomes the because the whole idea is you're doing bay'ul ma'dum. Bay'ul ma'dum, if it's bay'ul ma'dum, there's no ma'na to have a trade binding halan and delivery becomes hal because it's ma'dum. If you make the person, if you do mutalaba of taslim, you demand that person to deliver right now, it's meaningless. It's not practical because it's not existing. He doesn't have it with him, right? It might be a good
So
market, right?
I
But
think the problem is always we started the whole conversation on this and being istihsan and khilaf khilaf qiyas and so forth.
Mhm,
So because that is right, why can we allow this? If we come back to the discussion, Salam was originally to finance trade or
mhm,
farmers. The farmer needs to deliver. It's going to take 6 months to harvest. He needs the cash now. That's the original justification of Salam. The farmer
mhm,
wants to deliver his fruit, which I think is problematic now with the existence that has been the market for the whole time, because harvest crops come every 6 months. So leave that aside. That's the initial idea. We give you money now, we're going to buy your crops in 6 months' time. I'm not done there. So, but you say, okay, that's an exception to the things both counterparties need to be present. then we go to things, well, what if neither counterpart is present? When we talk about futures, do we do things like WAD? So it's like the Hanafi fiqh seems very insistent on we're trying to make sure both things are present, but we can't because the nas is here. So we do khilaf nas. The Shafi said, fine, we've got this salam contract here, okay, but we don't see why we should have any restriction on in time. If you can, so if we say this, if there's no requirement to have ajal in time, what's the difference between salam and bay? What are the difference in shurut or sifa? The only thing you're doing now is bay of shay fi dhimma, shay mawsuf, this is sha'aini. So what then is, if there's no time requirements, what's the difference between bay fi dhimma, the item shay mawsuf, and essentially salam?
Yeah, so for us, it's the same thing, right? For us, if you're selling something in your dhimma as the mabi and the thaman is like paid up spot ain, then that is salam for us. Same.
But are you requiring a time difference?
Yeah, so in salam, right, because the mabi, that's why initially there's no ma'na for a mabi not to be ain. Like no, in every bay mabi has to be like ain, it has to be specified. When it's dain, it takes the form of salam.
So I go to a shop, say, look, give me 10 liters of paint, Dulux trade paint. Shay Moshoff, they're all identical, it's not a problem, it's not any item. The guy says, fine, and you pay for it. He goes to the back of the shop and brings it forward to you. Is that salam? Because you're not seeing the item until he's delivered it.
It's not salam for us. It's there, it's present. These are like what these things are like what the fuqaha call like samples, like numudaj for us, right? But it's there. It's all a'yan which are standardized. They're all there. It's existing in his milkiya. So we won't deem that to be salam. You might deem that to be salam.
It's like, for
I think
example,
the thing is salam is no different. Very on.
But it's like, for example, if two people are sitting and they agree to, to sell each other the car. So he says to him, I'll buy your car. And they hand it over. The car is handed over at a different time, but it's still not salam. It's still just a
No,
buyer
but that's
contract.
any. That's an any item. You basically, the item's not more sold. The car is a specific car with a specific registration number. So you
Fair
couldn't
enough.
be item and salam in the first place.
But
Secondly, when
fair
is
enough.
it when
But I mean,
is not going to happen? When he pays the
in
money
your
or sorry, go on.
paint example, in your paint example, we'll just say the aqd. That's not the aqd. The aqd happens when the paint is actually present. It's muta'ayyin now, and you're making the payment. So when you're telling him get
But
this,
he's made payment beforehand. You
it's
go to
a
the counter and you go to do collection.
it's not an aqd. It's still an aqd. Just by you giving the money, it's purely just a like an advance deposit, right? And aqd will take place once he's got the paint in front of you. And that's not even necessary to make that ta'wil, but just for this conversation, right?
Sure.
You can say
It's
that.
like old school Argos.
Sorry?
When you pay the money, like
Yeah.
old school Argos. When you go there with your lounge, right?
Oh yeah.
There's a paper, you pay it, and they go to go and pick it up after 10 minutes in collection point, and you lose the item, you can't find it. So it's a similar idea.
Yeah.
No, but back to the point, the sell on time thing, yeah, we don't require it at all.
Yeah, so I've always found that interesting because I was always like trying to differentiate. And then I read somewhere from one of the Shafi'i books that of this idea of being ghaib, because I was just thinking, what's the difference between bay and salam for the Shafi'is then, when it's all hal, like it can be hal. But so for the Hanafis, for us, this is we raise a question then, like it has to be mu'ajjal. One is the nas, but secondly, it has to be mu'ajjal. This is the qiyas that we give to it and try to rationalize
So
the idea, right?
you have to remember the Shafi madhab in the U is a bit more nadhari than tatbiki. So we're much more theoretical. So it's more like, well, this is the principle. So how do we why should we do the restriction?
I would argue
Opposed to
that Hanafis
practical.
are more nadhari, but that's for a different day. Yeah.
I mean, nadhari in terms of it's not tried and tested in real life. So the Hanafi's been tried and tested more. So that's why we have Bayt al-Fasid. We don't have that. So the Hanafi is more practical in that way. Whereas the Shafis are more like, well, this is more of an ivory tower type derivation. So we say things like, yes, we say for the well, you have to do this and this, but forget it, just go and do Malik Madhab because we're being impractical here. So it's kind of, you study it and it's like a little bit of intellectual curiosity more than something you practically do.
No, jazakallah khair. So yeah, so then our fuqaha say up here, it's that The mutalaba of taslim, if you made mutalaba of the seller to do taslim, he would not be able to fulfill that. That's another reason why it has to be mu'ajjal. It has to be mu'ajjal for the ma'na of salam to operate, which is this person doesn't have something, he needs time to be able to deliver it. Now, what's the ajal? So Imam Muhammad rahimahullah mentions that it has to be it was 1 month. 1 month was like the minimum for salam, for this ta'jil, idea of ta'jil, to apply an ajal for something to be mu'ajjal. Qarhi rahimahullah, he mentions that it's based on urf and the nature of the Muslim fee. Nowadays practice, if you look at Fiqh al Muʿa, IOF standards and others, there's no specific time frame. It all just depends on the Muslim fee. We just make people make amal on Qarhi's qawl, an idea of dependent on the item and the urf, and that has become like the norm now as far as industry practice is concerned. Then وَلَا يَجُوزُ إِلَّا بِأَجْلٍ مَعْلُومٍ. Okay, so we established the ajal is another condition established by nas. You have to have, again, that's like that's what defines salam, this being dane. So again, it's like an istihsan idea. Again, another khilaf al-qiyas idea. But then the qiyas, we're going back to the qiyas now as far as everything else is concerned. If you have ajal, you have to have ajal ma'lum. That's also in the hadith. But then being ma'lum is a broader principle in the entirety of fiqh, where anything which leads to munaza'a cannot be permissible. Jahala leads to munaza'a, and that's why that will not be acceptable. So we're always trying to reduce jahala as much as possible. Then ولا يجوز السلم بمكيال رجل بعينه ولا بذراع رجل بعينه. It's not permissible to do salam using a measure of a specific person or the dhira of a specific person. So or a specific item or container. Yeah, you're using the mikyal or specific mikyal or specific dhira. What's the problem up here? The problem is we want to have a standardized measure which we can use objectively. This, if you're using a specific container which is not standard, or you're using a dhira which is not standard, that now becomes very is exposed to, it is high risk up here. Because what if it's not available? What if you can't get hold of that particular dhira, or you can't get hold of that particular measurement or that tool? Then it becomes very difficult to ascertain on delivery whether you've delivered the exact amount that was agreed to initially. So you have to use something which is a standardized measure, which can be objectively used. Why is this a condition? This asli again is based upon ضبط الصفة and معرفة المقدار. Because this again, now this is another reason which defeats that part. So what you agreed to at the outset can be different to what's delivered eventually, just from the container or measurement perspective. Right, so this is another idea in the mix. So we've mentioned like 3-4 different principles now in Salam, where the fuqaha are looking at the life cycle of a transaction. And throughout the entire journey, the kind of customer journey, user journey, or the life cycle of the mabi' and until delivery, what we are doing is at every single point, there should be no single point of failure as far as this transaction is concerned. So we've rectified or addressed issues to do with the contract. We've addressed issues to do with the mabi whilst it's in production or whilst it's in acquisition phase. We've addressed issues to do with the delivery as far as ajal being there, and as far as the way that you measured the item. So you see different points along the journey of this transaction, the life of this transaction. Wherever there's a possibility of niza', the fuqaha have addressed it so that we can mitigate risk of niza' at every single point. There should be no single point of failure in the life of this transaction, and that's what exactly the fuqaha are showing, because we want to minimize jahala and niza' as much as possible to make sure it's within the broader frameworks that we have. So وَلَا فِي طَعَامِ قَرْيَةٍ بِعَيْنِهَا. Right? Neither do we want the specific so the first one, رجل بعينه, specific person. Up here طعام قرية بعينها. We can't have salam where the ta'am and wheat is sourced, like, so you're saying it's specifically in terms of its origin and the source of supply is this particular town or this particular township or city, because it's possible there is um, a storm, a drought, or something happens. And in that scenario, that particular qarya will not have the um, the supply. So if you do this, if you specify a qarya, you are now restricting, you're increasing the possibility of niza. This is what's happening. These specifications are not increasing like wadaha. They're not clarifying. They're not creating more transparency. Rather, they are increasing the risk. So in some contracts, different terms do different things. Some terms increase transparency and clarity. Other terms can increase the risk and increase the potential of niza. And even that stands for today. Right? In different contracts, when you're analyzing contracts, certain terms are disruptive and certain terms are productive. So this is a disruptive term, which actually throws a spanner in the works and causes an issue, because when you're specifying this, now whilst you've been trying to address and minimize the niza throughout the contract, this particular thing can cause niza. That's why it's not permissible to specify. Now the fuqaha mention it's permissible to mention something in terms of bayanul jins. So if you just say, for instance, it's going to be Italian, something Italian, uh, or you're addressing the jins of something, but you're not specifically saying it has to be from this particular place, but it's just for bayanul jins, that's acceptable. But if it's for takhsisul makan, that's where the problem occurs. Now, this will obviously depend on then what is the makan, how big, how small, all of that can be discussed. It's just to do with, in the industry, how likely is it that the takhsis that you've done, that there could be something in that one specific place. If it's not likely, then it's okay, because then it just be something which is arm and generic, and the item is still possible to get hold of from that particular supply chain or source or origin, and depending how vast it is. So that's a whole nother kind of like tatbiqi angle and fatwa kind of angle to this issue. They mentioned up here. I just put this nas from like somewhere. ولو أسلم في حنطة العراق أو في حنطة خراسان فالسلم جائز، لأن العراق اسم ولاية وكذلك الخراسان، فلا يتوهم انقطاعها من أيدي الناس في عامة الولاية فجاز. So see, our fuqaha always just think like quite deep. So there's ways to work around this, right? That they mentioned. Then ولا ثمرة نخلة بعينها. So salam is not jais by specifying by saying the fruit of this particular tree. The same argument as above that we mentioned. It's very likely, or it's possible, that something happens to this one tree, and therefore it creates a problem in delivery. Then ولا يصح السلم عند أبي حنيفة رحمه الله تعالى إلا بسبعة شرائط تذكر في العقد. These are to be mentioned at the time of the عقد. جنس معلوم ونوع معلوم وصفة معلومة مقدار معلوم وأجل معلوم معرفة مقدار رأس المال إذا كان يتعلق العقد على مقداره كالمكيل والموزون والمعدود، وتسمية المكان الذي يوفيه فيه إذا كان له حمل ومؤونة كان له حمل ومؤونة. So these are the 7 conditions according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah that must be mentioned. Why these 7? Because these 7 are now serving everything that we've discussed in terms of sifa ma'luma, miqdar ma'luma, ajal. So all these different things, it all fits into here. So jins, the genus, what it is, it's no. When the fuqaha mention stuff like up here, no, what do they mean? So they mention things like how was it irrigated? So if you mention wheat, barley, or corn as a jins, that's a jins. These are different jins. Then you mention a no. What's an example of a no? No ma'loom. Like how was it irrigated? That's what the fuqaha mentioned. Like how was it irrigated? How was it produced? Then the sifa ma'luma means its description, its awsaf, its grading, its condition, its coloring. These things which add additional value. Quantity the amount, أجل معلوم, the delivery date. Then معرفة مقدار رأس المال إذا كان يتعلق العقد على مقداره كالمكيل والموزون المعدود. You need to know the amount, the precise amount of the payment method. Right? So whatever the price that you're using, the رأس المال, if it relates to something weighed, measured or counted, like is the asal in all contracts, you have to have ilm of what you're paying. There should be ilm. Otherwise there'll be like in this you won't know what it is, if you are not doing measuring, understanding the payment. And then the next one is وتسمية المكان الذي يوفيه إذا كان له حمل ومؤونة. Now this is the view of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. He mentions that the place of delivery has to be mentioned when there is a cost involved or some extra labor, effort, delivery is involved in delivering the item. Why is that the case? Why does that have to be mentioned? It's because when there is haml and ma'una, then typically that will be baked into the price. This impacts the valuation of the item. So because it impacts the valuation of the item, you need to mention this, because if you are getting it delivered 200 miles away, the price of that will be far more than something being delivered 10 miles away. So that has a direct implication on the valuation. Also, there's another reason the fuqaha mention is that it can be that the market that something is sourced from, depending on where you're getting it delivered, the price in a particular market can be different to the price where you are contracting right now. So that's why it's important to also have tasmiyatul makan of where you'll deliver when there's haml and mu'una. So those are the conditions. Now according to وقال لا يحتاج إلى تسمية رأس المال إذا كان معينا ولا إلى مكان التسليم ويسلمه في موضع العقد. صاحبين of the view, you don't need to mention رأس المال إذا كان معين. When it's known, it's like the asl that we have in Bay. When it's known, you don't need to worry. You do ishara, that's sufficient. When it's mu'ayyan, it's just there. You don't need to specify anything. ولا إلى مكان التسليم neither do you have to mention the place of taslim. Why don't you have to mention the place of taslim according to Sahibain? Because their view is that delivery becomes obligatory, right? Delivery becomes obligatory at the time of the contract. When it's become obligatory at the time of the contract, then the place of the contract, the makan al-aqd, becomes a default place. This is the default. It's become binding up here. When it's binding up here to do taslim here, this is the default. Then this is muta'ayyan, naturally. Why do they say that? Because for them, the obligation of delivery now is from the outset. It arises immediately. So it's then tied to the very place that you done the contract in. And they also mentioned there's no muzahama. There's no other place or location. So this is the only place, and therefore bitariq al-awla, it must be this particular place which is specified. So that's why you sallimuhu fi mawdi al-aqd. That becomes specified. According to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, why does he differ with this? He differs with this idea of taslim being binding. That's why he says that's not this وَيُسَلِّمُ فِي مَوْضِعِ الْعَقْدِ. It's not an asal as far as he's concerned. When there's يوفي إذا كان له حمل مؤونة, for him he's saying very clearly that there is nothing binding right now. It's not possible to do taslim right now. When it's not possible to do taslim right now, then it's not wajib to do taslim right now. It's not a contractual obligation. That's why it's necessary. There is muzahama. There is muzahama. When there is muzahama, you then need to do ta'yin. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Then this is وما لم يكن له حمل ومؤونة لا يحتاج فيه إلى بيان مكان الإفاء بالإجماع. Yeah, when there's no, now this is where Imam Hanif agrees. When there is no حمل مؤونة, then the taqyid is not mufid. when there's no hamal and ma'una, when there's no cost at all involved, then like the shart is typically, or the principle in mu'amalat is, whenever a shart is mufid, it's mu'tabar. When a shart is ghair mufid, it's not mu'tabar. So like in Egypt, this asal comes from ijara, but it applies in other aspects as well, like in wakala, it applies in bay and shurut as well, that when a taqyid is made in a contract, if that taqyid is mufid, then it's recognized and has an impact, it's mu'tabar. But when a taqyid has no benefit whatsoever, its absence and presence doesn't impact, make no difference whatsoever, then it's not mu'tabar. Meaning if you do differently, it's still fine. You're not breaching the contract by practicing on something different. So when something does not have hamal and ma'una, then it doesn't matter where you deliver, because there's no additional pricing to be captured in your discussion and your negotiation. You don't have to think about any other consideration. That's why then everybody agrees up here that you don't need to um, mention the particular price. وَيُوَفِّيهِ فِي الْمَكَانِ الَّذِي أَسْلَمَ فِيهِ. Then this becomes a default. The default then becomes the place that you do the aqd in, according to everybody. Then ولا يصح السلم حتى يقبض رأس المال قبل أن يفارقه فيه. Then salam is not permissible until you do qabd of the رأس المال before he departs the counterparty. Now, why is this the case? Because look, the istihsan was limited to selling ma'dum. That was the point. That's what the istihsan was about. It was bay'ul ma'dum. Everywhere else we're applying the qiyas. Our qiyas is that you can't do bay'ul dain bid-dain. Even that is mentioned through nas, right? But that's another principle of, when I mention qiyas up here, the overarching bay principles. So we can't do bay'ul dain bid-dain or bay'ul gali bil-gali if you don't take possession of the payment. That becomes bay'ul kali bil kali, and that's another breach of another principle. That's why we're still applying overarching principles of mu'amalat in salam, and we're just doing istihsan as far as salam is pushing us. That's it. So bay'ul kali bil kali is not permitted across the board. So we will not allow bay'ul kali bil kali. We'll only allow the salam item to be ma'dum. But as far as the payment now, we have to have it paid in full before the parties separate, to avoid another prohibition, which is bay'ul kali bil kali, becomes debt for debt. And likewise, the fuqaha mentioned another reason up here, which is the asal of salam. The very nature of salam is this. Now, this is a nice kind of like principle the fuqaha mentioned, that salam akhdhu ajilin bi ajilin. So the idea of salam is أخذ آجل بعاجل. So you're taking or you're receiving something later on بعاجل, some which in lieu of a immediate payment. That's the sifa and nature of salam. This sifa, and then they mention this, the idea of qabd is حق الشرع in salam. The way the shara has defined salam is with this sifa. So this cannot be changed. The qabd is a sifa of this aqd. The qabd, the Ratsul Mal, is a sifa of this aqd. You can never override that and change that. So this is another good example of, which I mentioned very early on, I think in our earlier lessons, this idea of different huquq existing in a contract. You have certain particulars which are huquq shara. What are huquq shara in most contracts? It's the integrals and requirements. Those things that can never be changed. If you change that, you change the very sifa that Shari has demanded. Now you might say, okay, where's the demand? Those demands might be coming from either statements, in terms of like somebody somewhere has mentioned it, whether it's in the Quran, Sunnah, the Sahaba, Tabi'een, or Fuqaha in Istinbat. But there's an idea that it's something that's stated, it forms part of the asal, or you're preventing something else like riba. And so you have to do it in this way, because if you don't do it in this way, it will trigger riba. That's another way to understand this, the essence of an aqd. So qabd Rasul Mal is from the essence of salam. You can never change that. So even if two counterparties, they mutually agreed that, look, it's not going to cause niza, we're both happy to have the payment done later, it'll still not be acceptable because they're changing the huquq al-ibad, or their own haqq, is overriding haqq al-shara, which can't happen. In matters which are not haqq al-shara, then you can agree to do things differently. You can agree, mutually agree that we'll do this. Okay, we'll leave this on the tree. Or we can, we'll allow this to happen. Like in the masala of like in ijara, um, when you've put a shajara, the fuqaha give like three options on what to do. Not a zara. In when it's zara, when you're doing zira'a, the fuqaha mentioned istihsanan will allow the zara to continue in the land, so both parties benefit. The landowner gets rent, and the tree or the crops owner, he gets the crops to mature and ripe. So he benefits. He doesn't lose his effort, just like that. So we apply istihsan there, that we let the contract continue rolling, even though qiyasan, the contract should have been cancelled and terminated because it matured and it came to the end of the term. But when it comes to like a shajara, a tree, something which has longevity in it, and it doesn't have a nihaya ma'luma, the fuqaha mention they have parties have three options. Either, the first thing is he will remove the tree. The owner of the tree must remove the tree from a land that he's leased to plant that tree. That's the asal. Like you do it, you remove the tree and you take your tree and hand the land back to the owner fariqatan, how it was. Or the landowner pays the like gharama and daman, and he pays for the price of a tree maqlu'an, the value of the tree out of the earth, because the value of that is different to the value as it's planted. And when it's planted, he's benefiting from the land of the person. So obviously the valuation would be higher of a tree when it's planted. So the landowner would pay according to the price of a tree which is maqlu' and uprooted. Or the third option the fuqaha give is that they can do this as well. They can agree to leave the tree as is. So look, these are different ways in their own huquq. They are being given options on how to mitigate and navigate this problem. So there's like three possibilities there that they can agree on. Okay, so similar up here is a discussion. So this is due to haqq shar. That's the second reason that some fuqaha have mentioned somewhere. Okay, um, okay, we'll stop here. Any questions? I'm just conscious of time. Next bit is a whole different discussion. Sheikh Abdul Samad, go ahead.
Jazakallah khair, Mufti Sir. Just a quick question. If the musallam fihi or the Muslim fihi becomes munqati' during the time of the aqd, is it possible to turn it into like an istisna contract or bay'ul bin namudaj, or is there any way to do tahri للجواز, or it's just finished, the whole contract is over?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. Can you transfer? So the problem with istisna is, in our madhab, istisna is very limited. Like if you don't follow the principle of istisna, it becomes salam immediately. Istisna is only applicable in those places is as a wa'ad, right? Like when we discuss istisna next week or the week after, istisna is perhaps the most unique contract or understanding. That's why we only have like one sentence. We only have like one sentence on istisna in this bab. It's at the end of salam, right? The last line, and the next bab after salam. What's the next bab after salam in Birat al-Muqtadi? There's a reason why the fuqaha have even placed istisna here. Let's just check what it was. Istisna, and then there's Masail Manthura. Yeah, next, right? But the first, is Masail Manthura, which is next, right? But yeah, istisna is right at the end. So to put it in under istisna, we'll have to see whether it can fit. I don't have an answer right now in my mind, to be honest. But I mean, the asl would be it become void. But if let's see if you can do any kind of tahaddi lil jawaz to make it into something else. But then that would mean if you're trained if you're mutating the contract from one thing to the other, it must be that the other contract was also valid from the outset, and that the salam was not really salam fi nafsi. I mean, it could have been either or. We're just using the language of salam then, so it's a difficult one.
Which is okay, right? From
It's
al-ibra
okay.
bil ma'ani,
Yeah, it's okay.
al-mabani.
But we just have to make sure that they both like the from for the life of that it's fine.
Mm.
But let's revisit that question when we get to istisna and see if we can make it fit into istisna.
And
I
just
think
to clarify,
yeah.
this qaid, you would say that it's mansoos. That's the main reason that we uphold it. So in that case, would we the qaid of it being present from the time of contract to the time of delivery
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
market?
Yeah.
Otherwise, could you say that the qawl of Shafi'i is actually the qiyas, similar to like nisab, for example?
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
consider ibtida and intiha,
Yeah.
but here we're considering the entirety because of the nas.
Yeah. That's why to us as I said, from a bait perspective, it doesn't really like qiyas. It doesn't make it doesn't. It's not something that can make sense to us from a bait perspective. But yeah, from a salam istihsan perspective, we understand why it's there. But it's a istihsan idea for sure.
Jazakumullah khairan.
Anyone else? No. Inshallah, I think maybe Sheikh Munir asks if the time period is based on estimate, will it be okay, or is it fine as long as not mufdi ila al-munaza'a? Yeah, I mean it's always estimation. Like you're giving a very strong estimation, and then that will also then in urf is it okay to have like typically most items nowadays. This ajal ma'lum is there's also an urfi thing to it. The whole point is we're just trying to avoid munaza'a. Munaza, as far as we're concerned, certain things like it depends what the product is as well. Certain products and certain companies and certain assets have a very defined date. So Apple will tell you it's coming on the 15th of February, and it's going to come on the 15th of February, for instance. Now that might be for unless there's something major happens and the supply chains get messed up. But I would say it just depends. As long as there's an order for a particular thing where there's a window period, that in our order is acceptable. People agree that it's going to come between the first and the third, or first and the fifth. It can't be something which is significant, like between the first and the 20th. That's like a material significant difference. But many companies nowadays they work on a very like fixed kind of date, delivery date. That's like becoming the norm now. But I assume where there's no niza or there's very less likelihood of niza, and it's immaterial, then Urfan will deem that all to be just be one kind of like period, and it becomes acceptable. That is ajal ma'lum now. That bracket is ajal ma'lum. Okay. Inshallah, we'll stop here and we'll continue. I think next week is a bank holiday. If it's bank holiday, we'll have the time off. Inshallah. Have a break, right? Bank holiday on a Monday, inshallah, and then we'll continue the week after. All right, everyone, take care, inshallah, and I'll see you all in the next session. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan.